In 2021, we lost the last four living stars of the classic 1970s sitcom, The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Cloris Leachman, who played Mary's neighbor Phyllis Lindstrom, died in January. Gavin MacLeod, who played writer Murray Slaughter, died in May. Ed Asner, who played Mary's boss, Lou Grant, died in August. And Betty White, who played Sue Ann Nivens, died on the last day of December. It seems weird, doesn't it, that 1 year would take so many people who were connected by something they had in common. The thing is, about 3 million Americans die every year. And even just looking at celebrities, it's several hundred famous people who die. With big numbers, some very unexpected patterns pop up. Today, here are 9 surprising facts like that about the celebrities and newsmakers who died in 2021 in this special episode of Immortalized. I'm Steven Siegel from Legacy.com, the world's largest network of obituaries.
And I'm Linnea Crowther, Legacy's news editor and lead obituary writer. So, yes, we published almost 550 news obituaries in 2021, and there's some really surprising stuff in there.
One odd fact that became really remarkable at the end of the year was there was an unusual cluster of great race car drivers who died.
Yes, and specifically 3 of the Unser family, the really notable family of racing champions who were known over the years for winning at Indy 500 and in the Pikes Peak Hill Climb. So Bobby Unser died in May, and then his son, Bobby Unser Jr., died just a few weeks later in June. And then Bobby's brother, Al Unser, died in December.
That is such a hard year for their family.
Yeah. When you hear about a family experiencing so many losses in a short amount of time, which a lot of us who aren't celebrities have also had to deal with, it really drives home how precious our time on this earth is.
It does. Another startling pattern we saw in 2021 was how many soap opera stars died.
Oh, yeah, for real. I know not everybody follows soap operas, but if you do, I bet you noticed how many classic leading men we lost this year.
General Hospital, I think, was hit the hardest. 4 actors from the show died last year, including Stuart Damon, who played Dr. Alan Quatermain for decades.
There was also Michael Nader from Dynasty, Jerry Douglas from The Young and the Restless, Ray McDonald from All My Children, and John Gabriel from Ryan's Hope. And it wasn't just the men either. From Guiding Light, both Michael Tylo and Lisa Brown died. They played the fan favorite couple, Quint and Nola. All in all, there were 14 notable soap opera actors who died in 2021.
Wow, soap stars were like their own whole section of the obituaries.
Yeah, but that said, actors and athletes are definitely not the only kinds of memorable people whose lives and deaths we report. One thing we've seen in recent years is that a lot of Americans who fought for our freedoms, either in the armed forces during World War II or in the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, have been passing away recently.
2 of those people had something fascinating connecting them. One of them was Martha White, a black woman who set off a bus boycott in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in 1953 when she refused to give up her seat in the front of a bus. That was 2.5 years before Rosa Parks did the same thing on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. And one of the reasons the Montgomery boycott was successful is that they learned important lessons from Baton Rouge.
Every time I write an obituary like that one, I learn a little bit more about our history.
And the interesting thing is that Martha White wasn't the only person who died last year whose life overlapped with Rosa Parks's bus protest. There was also Lucille Times, who got into not just a face-off, but a fist fight with the very same bus driver 6 months before he had Rosa Parks arrested. Lucille launched her own one-woman bus boycott. She would drive around to bus stops in her car and offer rides to black passengers so they could just skip the bus.
That is just fantastic. And they both lived such long, full lives. I saw that Martha lived to be 99 and Lucille was 100 when she died in August.
So, was it me, or did we actually see a lot of headlines in 2021 for people who lived to be 100?
Yeah, actually, 16 of our news obituaries were for centenarians, people who are 100 or older. The very oldest was Ruthie Thompson, who was an animator on Disney's Snow White way back in the 1930s, and she lived to be 111.
Wow.
And there really were a lot of notable people who lived very long lives before they died in 2021. 24% of our obituaries last year were for people who were 90 or older.
On the other hand, there was at least one group of newsmakers last year with a large number of younger deaths from mostly natural causes, and that was old school hip hop artists. No fewer than 8 notable rappers died in their 50s in 2021. DMX, Biz Markie, Prince Marky D from the Fat Boys, Shock G from Digital Underground, Gift of Gab from Black Alicious, Black Rob, Kangol Kid from UTFO, and Deezer D, who a lot of people remember from his acting role on ER.
Right, and then Duke Booty, who wrote and rapped the classic song The Message for Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, died too. He was 69. And their causes of death are sobering. 3 heart attacks, 2 with congestive heart failure, diabetes, colon cancer, kidney failure. It was so sad to watch these deaths just keep coming in 2021, and I know fans of classic hip hop were really hit hard by it.
Now, Linnea, I know that every January you put together some statistics on the past year's obituaries. And this is one of the most interesting things you find each year. Which groups of people in the headlines die younger versus older?
Right, and one thing we consistently see every year is that certain categories of celebrities tend to live a lot longer than others. Can you guess which type of celebrity lived the longest on average in 2021?
So in past years, it's been writers, hasn't it?
Yes, which made us both feel good about our choice of career. And writers were up there again this year, but actually, the people who lived longest in 2021 were politicians.
Somebody, somewhere, is formulating a joke about that right now.
I'm sure they are. Well, if they want more details for their joke, the average age of the politicians we featured last year in our obituaries was 83 and a half, compared to the average age across all of last year's notable obituaries, which was 76. Close behind the politicians, business leaders had an average age of 83, and both writers and scientists lived to an average age of 82. Those are pretty similar numbers to what I saw in the last few years, so it's definitely a trend.
But on the other side of that, there are some groups of notable people who we see tending to die tragically young. And the youngest last year averaged just 47 and a half years old. And that was reality stars.
Right, and that's a catch all term we use for stars of reality TV, as well as people who are internet famous, like YouTubers and Instagram influencers. So there were several who died in their 60s last year, like Alaskan Bush People star Billy Brown. But then we saw people like YouTuber Lee McMillan and Baldwin Hills reality star Garen Taylor dying so young, just 28 and 30 years old.
But the reality stars didn't actually make up a large percentage of our notable obits last year, did they?
No, although they are certainly dying young, they're not dying in large numbers. Only about 3% of the obits we wrote last year were for reality stars.
You know, I remember a year ago when we did this, we talked about how the largest number of famous deaths in 2020 were musicians. It felt like so many incredible musicians had died in 2020 at all ages and from all genres.
Absolutely. And when I look back at the numbers from 2020, that's right. 22% of last year's notable obituaries were for musicians, compared to athletes at 18.5% and actors at 16.5%. What's interesting, though, is that this year, looking at 2021, again, musicians made up 22% of the obituary headlines, exactly the same percentage as last year. But it didn't feel like the biggest category in 2021, did it?
It did not. I would have said that we wrote a ton of obituaries for actors this past year.
That's right. There were still a lot of musicians, but the number of actors who died in 2021 jumped up substantially. About 22.5% of our notable obits were for actors last year, and 9% of those were soap opera stars. But what is interesting there is that overall, we did write fewer total news obituaries in 2021 than in 2020, about 8.5% fewer. But we still wrote more obituaries for actors last year than we did in 2020. So the percentage jump from 2020 to 2021 for actors was a big one.
When we look at these patterns in who died, I think it's natural, and we see a lot of people online trying to find some deeper meaning in them.
Oh, totally. As human beings with hopefully some common sense, when we see patterns, we look for reasons they're there. And death is such a profound thing that sometimes people wonder if there's something mysterious or even sinister that they're missing. The real invisible connection, though, isn't really a secret. It's just a fact we forget sometimes, which is people die every day, millions of people every year, because death is part of everyone's life eventually. And if you look at large enough numbers, some of those people are connected to each other because that's how life works. We're all connected to each other. And I actually don't find that disturbing at all. I find it really inspiring.
On that note, that's our show for today. Thank you to my co-host Linnea Crowther and to our producer John Maxwell. Thank you also to Legacy.com, where you can now honor a loved one's memory by planting memorial trees in their name. Just visit Legacy.com/trees. If you enjoyed today's episode, you can subscribe to Immortalized on your favorite podcast app. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just look up Legacy.com on YouTube. And if you're on Facebook, you can follow Legacy.com there for daily updates. Thanks for watching.